Praise be to the one true God, ar-Rahman, the Lord of all realms of existence. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and may the grace of the Most High God be forever in your favor. Welcome to our continued exegetical analysis of Chapter 2 of the Quran, Surat al-Baqarah. In this video, we are going to be covering verses 23 and 24, which continue the discourse on the bounty and blessings of Allah upon mankind. The verses invite mankind to produce a chapter like the Quran if they ever find themselves in doubt or restlessness about the Quran's divine origin, thereby reaffirming the Quran's unique qualities and asserting its status as a divine revelation sent for the guidance of humanity. Now, before we get started with our analysis of the verses, let us provide a quick recap on the previous verses, i.e. verses 21-22, as these provide a contextual analysis of the verses in question. The contextual analysis provides insights into the historical background and relevance of the verse within the broader socio-religious context of the Quranic society and the early propagation of its message. In verses 21 and 22, we saw that Allah cautions man to be in servitude to his Lord, as he is the sole progenitor and mastermind of creation as a whole, thereby emphasizing the importance of recognizing and expressing gratitude for the divine favors bestowed upon humanity, as well as the principle of absolute monotheistic devotion and the prohibition against setting up rivals and oppositions to Allah. In this video, we are going to be covering verses 23 and 24, which continue the discourse on the bounty and blessings of Allah upon mankind. It is thence, within this context, that verses 23 and 24 encourage man to challenge the Quran's divine origin by producing something similar that rivals its profoundness and impact, should man ever be in doubt or restlessness about its godly authorship. There have been various interpretations of these verses among speakers and scholars, with some suggesting that the challenge mentioned therein is addressed to man to produce something that rivals the Quran's eloquence, linguistic and literary qualities, as well as its status as a divine revelation, given their mastery of the Arabic language. According to this view, this challenge serves as a testament to the unique nature of the Quran and its unparalleled linguistic and literary qualities. Similarly, the verses further challenge the skeptics to call upon their witnesses or supporters to assist them in producing a chapter like the Quran, thereby indicating that the challenge is open to anyone who doubts the divine origin of the Quran, as well as anyone who claims the ability to match its miraculous nature. The requirement to call upon witnesses underscores the seriousness and magnitude of the challenge posed by Allah. The environment in which this chapter was revealed was most likely characterized by skepticism and opposition to the message of the Quran, and hence why many of the verses that we will encounter throughout this series on the exegetical analysis of the Quran were revealed in response to the doubts and objections raised by the perfidious regarding the authenticity and miraculous nature of the Quran. Verse 23 challenges the skeptics to provide evidence for their claims, and it demonstrates the Quran's superiority as a divine revelation. The challenge to produce a chapter like it underscores the Quran's unique style, eloquence, and depth of meaning. Now, given that introduction, let us move on to the exegetical analysis of the verses in question. Exegetical analysis of verses 23 and 24 of Surat al-Baqarah. In the name of the one true God, ar-Rahman, the Merciful. And if you should ever be in restlessness or doubt about that which we have caused to descend upon our servant Muhammad, then produce forth a chapter of its like, and invoke your witnesses aside from Allah if you happen to be credible. But since you have not done so, and you are certainly not going to do so, then in the least be mindful of the fire, whose fuel will be people and rocks, prepared for the perfidious. Verse 23 outlines the known challenge to mankind to produce or come up with something that parallels the Quran's uniqueness and impact. The challenge of the Quran, as outlined in the verse, is a profound assertion of the Quran's divine origin and unparalleled excellence. The Quran presents itself as the word of Allah. It asserts that the Quranic text is not the product of human endeavor, but a direct communication from the Creator and Lord of all the worlds. This divine origin is fundamental to understanding the significance of this Quranic challenge to the skeptics. It revolves around its uniqueness, which is deemed to be unparalleled by anyone, as per verse 88 of chapter 17, which alludes to the impossibility of either man or jinn, to produce anything remotely close to the Quran, despite their combined efforts. The Quranic text is characterized by its eloquence, coherence, and depth of meaning. Its verses are imbued with profound wisdom, guidance, and moral teachings that resonate with people across cultures and centuries. This challenge is not only limited to a specific group or time period, but it is applicable to anyone who questions the divine origin of the Quran. According to popular claims, numerous attempts have, throughout history, been made to produce a text similar to the Quran, but none have succeeded in meeting this challenge, though this is more of a popular claim than a factual one. The failure of these attempts, according to this assertion, serves as a testament to the Quran's unique qualities, and it reinforces its claim to divine authorship. Failure to produce a chapter like the Quran not only undermines the credibility of the skeptics, but also reaffirms the Quran's status as a divine revelation. The phrase, "and if you should ever be in restlessness or doubt," is addressed to the same addressee as in the previous two verses, i.e., mankind, expressed in the word you. Meaning, if you human beings should ever be in restlessness or doubt, with the word restlessness, implying a state of not being able to rest as a result of anxiety due to the puzzling effects of the Quran. Doubt here is meant in terms of having scrupulously examined, reviewed, and scrutinized the arguments presented in the Quran for its divine origins, as well as failing to demonstratively explain its uniqueness and impactful nature, and yet maintaining doubt and perplexity in its divine origin. Then the next step would be to produce something of its equivalence. Meaning, after having examined the Quran carefully, if you still do not come to the conclusion that it is of divine origin, then your obvious conclusion would be that of human origin. And since this is all that you are left with, then producing something similar should be relatively easy and simple for you to accomplish. Verse 23 precedes Allah's admonition to man to not set up rivals and oppositions to Allah. Thus, for anyone who undertakes this challenge, they, in doing so, would be setting up a rival or opposition to Allah while they know. Similarly, the verse likewise underscores the impossibility of there being rivals or oppositions to Allah as other divine entities. For if there were other divine rivals or oppositions, then they would be able to announce themselves to mankind just as he has done throughout history. In other words, there would be some sort of revelation from these entities that challenges the Quran's challenge, so as to defend themselves if they truly were a reality. Hence, the phrase, "then produce forth a chapter of its like," here would imply producing a chapter or some sort of section taken from a revelation or inspiration handed out by these so-called divine entities. The phrase "of its like" would thence infer something of revelatory nature, not in terms of its syntactical, grammatical, or linguistic nature, but rather it being a revealed scripture from the divine. The other way the phrase, "then produce forth a chapter of its like," can be understood is of course in terms of its unique and linguistic nature, i.e., its eloquence, style, structure, rhythm, and impact on its hearer are what set it apart and make it unmatchable. The verse further challenges the skeptics to call upon their witnesses or supporters to assist them in producing a chapter like the Quran, here expressed in the phrase, "and invoke your witnesses aside from Allah, if you should be credible." This requirement underscores the seriousness and magnitude of the challenge, as it implies that the skeptics cannot accomplish this feat on their own and require assistance from others. Furthermore, it underscores the level of confidence by the author in his work, that they are willing to put forth such a challenge. Herein, the author is demanding other than himself to act as witnesses to it, underscoring the level of humility from Allah, even though He is the one with honor. Through this statement, Allah is willing to set aside His honor and dignity as the Shaheed, i.e. witness, of everything, and allow man to cite or invoke their own witnesses to judge their own work, as this should remove any doubt from their minds. Since if the witnesses should be from the party of Allah, there may be biases that might contaminate the results. Thus, it is essential that the witnesses come from the fellow skeptics and doubters who truthfully assess and scrutinize both works in terms of their eloquence, style, structure, rhythm, and ability to change hearts and minds and inspire the same level of devotion. No piece of work can accomplish this feat unless it were a book of divine origin. For only Allah knows how the hearts and minds think and behave, as the Quran speaks of and quotes the inner dialogues, feelings, emotions, and turmoil of both these faculties in its refutations against its detractors. Lastly, the verse concludes with the statement, "If you happen to be credible," meaning, if you happen to have any truthfulness or credibility in what you say, then you will come to the same conclusion as stated in these verses. The verse seems to suggest that it is impossible to both be truthful and accomplish this feat, highlighted in the following verse. This part of the verse is especially important, as most people would do so with dishonest intentions and wrong motives. Most, if not all, tend to lead with their emotions, using their disdain for the Quran to fuel their ineptitude and ignore its profoundness and the impact it has had on countless lives throughout history. Some even go as far as claim it to not be eloquent, structured, or impactful, all in an attempt to hide their inability and incapability to grasp its magnificence and profound meaning. However, this merely underlines their insecurities and inadequacies to comprehend with reason, whereas with others, it is simply out of laziness and unwillingness to think further than they do. Verse 24 begins with a conditional statement, "But since you have not done so," implying that since those who chose to take up the challenge were unable to meet the requirements posed in the challenge, then they, in the least, had to prepare themselves for the consequences. This phrase is also typically rendered as, "But if you do not do so," in that if those who choose to take up the challenge do not do so, i.e. do not come up with a chapter like the Quran, then they should be weary of the consequences of what that would entail. The verse continues with the statement, "And you are certainly not going to do so," thereby strengthening the previously mentioned sentiment, i.e. you are certainly never going to be able to do so. It serves as both a reassurance for the faithful and a stern warning to those who think too highly of themselves. The Quran here asserts its confidence in its ability to achieve whatever it has set out to achieve, and it leaves no room for challenging that assertion, simply by stating that those who try to achieve this feat will never be able to do so. Therefore, the faithful can rest assured that their fidelity is placed in something solid and secure in its claim of divine origin. It is clear from history that no revelation or scripture has had as much of an impact on man and civilization as the Quran has ever since its proclamation by the Prophet Muhammad, thereby adding even the more credibility to its true origin. No book is chanted or read more times in its entirety than the Quran, and no book is held in higher regards by its adherents than the Quran ever since its revelation, perhaps thereby proving its assertion in its proclamation in this verse of being unmatched by any other scripture. The verse then asserts that if they are incapable of producing a chapter of its like, then they should, in the least, be mindful of the fire, whose fuel will be people and rocks, prepared for the perfidious. This imagery of the fire is used to emphasize the severity and intensity of the punishment awaiting the perfidious. It is described as a fire whose fuel is not only limited to combustible materials like wood or coal, but which also includes men and stones. This metaphorical description signifies the comprehensive nature of the punishment, encompassing both human beings and inanimate objects. The verse furthermore emphasizes that the fire is specifically prepared for the perfidious, which underscores the justice of Allah and His accountability for those who consciously reject His guidance and persist in perfidious conduct. This punishment is not to be understood as arbitrary, but rather as reserved for those who reject acting faithfully with regards to the commands of Allah, despite being warned of the consequences. Furthermore, the word fire in this verse can be understood in a metaphorical sense to refer to a symbolic fire, i.e., a kind of devastation that is brought on by an ignited fire, and not necessarily the fire of hell, thereby meaning, be mindful of a devastation whose ignition, i.e., what can set it ablaze, is men and stones, implying both manual ignition, i.e., by men who ignite the fire, and automatic ignition, such as when flint rocks smash into each other and ignite due to the friction between them. Much can be added to what I presented in this analysis on these verses. However, for the sake of simplifying everything in a more condensed and digestible manner, we shall leave it at that for now and continue on in the next analysis video. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to subscribe and like the video, and may the grace of the Most High God continue to be forever in your favor.